Drawing my story. Since September 2015, I have lived with chronic pain, starting in my face and later spreading down my spine and into my legs. Most people did not understand or believe me, and it wasn't until recently that I understood how important it is for others to understand invisible illness. When no one can see your pain or your illness, it can be hard to power your self-motivation. Having an illness that is invisible is disabling. Many can struggle to carry on with life as normal and often have no option but to ask for help. Living your life with chronic pain makes every day a battle, but if you keep on fighting hard enough, you can get to where you want to be. Despite living with an invisible illness, I had managed to gain a place at one of the world's leading institutions for contemporary dance, a highly regarded conservatoire in London. I managed to dance and train, consistently achieving high grades. I had never felt more proud for all that I had achieved and was quite literally living my childhood dream. That was until April 2019, when everything started to go downhill. In an attempt to reduce the pain, I was put on a new medication. This, however, unexpectedly increased the pain significantly. It became harder and harder to maintain everyday life, yet I still managed to dance and continue with training. A month later, I developed an infection in my left lung. Diagnosed with asthma since I was little, this made it particularly difficult to breathe. In addition to high levels of pain, it became harder and harder to keep fighting. Despite all illness, I continued to dance, its invisibility remaining oblivious to many of my peers. At the end of May, during an assessed performance, I got an extremely tight squeezing pain on the left side of my chest, which left me quite literally gasping for air. After finishing the performance, I was left with sharp pain and a very tight chest. I decided to take myself to A&E the following day. While sitting in the waiting room, the right side of my head and upper body suddenly went numb and weak. I wasn't able to hold my head up. I became unresponsive, lightheaded, and could no longer talk at all. I was urgently transferred into the Majors unit for emergency observation. Within minutes I was attached to a heart monitor and ended up having 6 needles in my left arm and 4 in my right. The weakness had spread and I could no longer move from my legs upwards. The concern of a TIA arose, but doctors were unable to do any scans as I had started to shake and move involuntarily. I was in severe pain and had pins and needles all over my body. Alarms on the heart monitor were set off as I began hyperventilating. After 4 hours, I was able to speak again. Although this was only very quiet and limited to a few words, I was later discharged that evening. Any slight directional change left me dizzy. I needed help sitting up and had to relearn how to hold a pen. I suddenly needed help on simple things like cutting food up. The pain continued to try and knock me down. Suddenly I was less independent than I had ever been before. After a week to recover, I returned to train on the high-intensity dance course, learning and completing a demanding performance in less than a week. A few days later, during a lesson, my head became numb and my brain started to freeze. I decided to sit out, my head feeling like it was blocked in a cloud of smoke. Suddenly, I went unresponsive. No response could be received by my teacher or friends, and an ambulance was called immediately. I could no longer support my own body weight and was unable to move anything. I could not speak, and my vision had blurred and doubled. I could hear people's voices around me, but understood them like it was a different language. It took 8 hours before I could speak or move again, and was discharged early hours of the next day, having to find myself home with my mum at 2 a.m. before I had chance to even try and walk first. A few days later, I returned back to the dance conservatoire, joining in with all I could and observing for the next few days. As our final technique assessments were fast approaching, I wanted to finish the year on a high. With the help of my friends, I learnt the entire exercises for all 3 techniques, memorising them, successfully putting all my observations into movement. I prepared myself to complete the year to a high standard, despite all limitations. I woke the next day feeling like I was in a cloud. For my own safety, I decided to go and watch the class, sitting out and verbally participating to help my peers. Towards the end of the lesson, I became unresponsive again. My friends alerted the teacher, and once again, an ambulance was called. I couldn't speak or move and was carried into the corridor away from the heat of the dance studio. Paramedics arrived and once again I was taken to hospital. Taken into the Majors unit, my mum arrived after a 2-hour travel to see me attached to a drip with an oxygen mask on, unable to speak or move. Numerous scans and tests were carried out and I found myself in hospital for the next 3 days. It took 12 hours before I could move again and 55 hours before I could speak. After being discharged due to having an appointment, I was advised to return home and rest by the institution. After all the work I had put in, I no longer had the opportunity to show all that I had learnt. I had no option but to return home, leaving my friends who were completing all that I had dreamt to do. After a month of being at home, I went unresponsive again, my mum unable to wake me. An ambulance was called and they arrived half an hour later. During that time, I had started to involuntarily fit. My oxygen levels had dropped to the 70%, the safe level being 94% or above. A tube was immediately put down my nose and I was put on oxygen. It felt like screws were tightening my throat and pushing through my neck. I was in severe pain and once again could not speak or move. I was urgently taken by ambulance to our local hospital, finding myself in the Majors and Resuscitation unit. My oxygen levels had eventually returned back to normal, yet once again I started to fit. It was confirmed that I was having seizures. After spending a week on the emergency ward, I had been having seizures 4 to 5 times within a 24-hour period, each one lasting between 1 to 2 hours. I was exhausted, in severe pain, and missed my independence. At 19 years old, suddenly I had needed help to get changed, to wash, and could only walk very short distances with support. After seizures, I got very confused, not remembering where I was, and at times couldn't remember my date of birth. It had been decided that I needed to be transferred to a specialist neurology hospital. I ended up spending another 2 weeks in hospital. The seizures continued to be frequent, yet have reduced in length to 30 to 45 minutes. My forehead would go numb, my chest and throat would tighten, and my eyes would seal shut, the muscles so stiff that I was unable to open them. I was consistently banging my head and body on walls and objects in the room. My body became covered in bruises. Eventually, an EEG was done to record the activity in my brain whilst having a seizure. A diagnosis of non-epileptic seizures was confirmed. Unlike epileptic seizures, this is a problem with the functioning of the brain, the wrong messages being sent to the rest of the body. It was decided that I needed to be seen by a neuropsychiatrist to help discover the cause of the seizures. After spending 3 weeks in hospital, I was discharged home, despite still having seizures. I had had over 30 injections all over my body, in my arms, stomach, legs and head. I had lost just under 10 kilograms over the past couple of months and was weaker than I'd ever been before. My determination to get back to dance training was the carrot on the end of the stick which kept me going. After learning that I had achieved a distinction for the year, I knew inside that I was strong enough to get through troubles which come my way. Despite everything that happened, I not only got through the year, but I got through it achieving higher than my expectations. When I returned home, my mum had no option but to take on the role of a 24-hour carer. As there are very limited neuropsychiatry services in the UK, we had no option but to pay privately to receive care and answers as to what was causing the seizures. We were advised by numerous doctors that these seizures needed to be treated as soon as possible, otherwise they can get progressively worse. We were fortunate enough to receive funding for an initial assessment by a charity, one which have helped our family previously through many hard times. The remaining cost, however, for further treatment would need to be funded for by myself. Upon talking to the neuropsychiatrist, he advised the main cause of my seizures was the chronic pain, the invisible illness which I had battled silently for over 3 years. He advised that its severity causes the body to shut down as it can no longer function properly with the pain. Alongside several traumatic events which had occurred within our family, a cause of the seizures was finally known. Alongside medication, the warning signs started to reduce. I was taught strategies to help control the triggers, and eventually the seizures began to decrease. If doctors had understood my pain, I could have received treatment a lot sooner. When people don't understand your illness, it builds another barrier against normality. Just because you can't see it, it doesn't mean it isn't there. I created Illustrating Invisible Illness to try and help raise awareness and to raise funds for my treatment. My invisible illnesses are an ongoing problem. They will not go away. Please go to the link in the description to view the website for more information and subscribe to show your support for invisible illness. Thank you.